The first morning, James Monroe felt it. He thought maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on him. He had spent 3 months building his cabin in the Colorado high country, cutting and stacking logs until his hands were raw. The September nights were already dropping below freezing. But when he woke that morning, something was wrong. The cabin felt different. Not warm exactly, but not cold either. He sat up in his bedroll and stared at the walls. Outside, frost covered everything. The pines were white with it. His breath should have been clouding in front of his face. It wasn't. He walked to the door and pushed it open. The air hit him like a wall. Sharp, bitter, cutting. He stepped back inside and closed the door. The difference was immediate. Not just shelter from wind. Something else. He put his hand on the inner wall. It was cool but not freezing. He walked to the outer wall and touched it. His fingers recoiled, ice cold. The 2 walls were telling different stories. He stood there for a long moment, trying to understand what his hands had just learned. Then he remembered something his grandfather had told him 40 years earlier. A story about mountain cabins in the old country. A trick the Highlanders used. Dead air, his grandfather had called it. The space between 2 walls that neither heat nor cold could cross. James had thought it was just old-world superstition. Now, standing in his double-walled cabin on a frozen morning, he realized his grandfather had given him something worth more than gold, a secret that would keep him alive through winters that killed other men, and summers that drove them down from the mountains in defeat. What James Monroe discovered that morning would change how men built in the high country. It would save lives, protect supplies, and prove that sometimes the old ways held truths that modern thinking had forgotten. This is the story of how one man's desperate gamble on a building technique nobody believed in became the difference between survival and surrender, and how the space between 2 walls became the secret weapon against a mountain that showed no mercy. James Monroe arrived in the San Juan Mountains in the spring of 1887 with nothing but a wagon, 2 mules, and a claim to 40 acres he had never seen. He was 43 years old. Most men his age were settled, had families, homes, roots. James had none of those things. What he had was a memory of failure and a need to prove something he could not quite name. The land office clerk in Durango had warned him the high country was no place for a man alone. Winters could hit early and stay late. Supply runs were impossible once snow closed the passes. Men had gone up and never come back down. James listened, nodded, signed anyway. He reached his claim in mid-May. The snow was still 3 feet deep in the shade. The site was a small clearing on a south-facing slope, protected by a rock wall to the north and bordered by a stream that ran cold and clear. It was beautiful. It was also 8,000 feet above sea level and 40 miles from the nearest settlement. James stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at the forest around him. Lodgepole pine, spruce, aspen. Enough timber to build 10 cabins. He unloaded his tools from the wagon. An axe, a saw, an adze, a mallet, chisels, and a plumb line. Everything else he would make or do without. The first week, he cut trees. The second week, he stripped bark and cut logs to length. By the third week, his hands were covered in blisters that had broken and reformed as calluses. He worked from sunrise until dark, ate cold beans and hardtack, slept under the wagon. The spring rains came and turned everything to mud. He kept working. By June, he had the foundation stones in place. The first logs went up slowly. Each one had to be notched, fitted, lifted, adjusted. Alone, it took him an hour to place a single log. He developed a system using ropes and leverage. It was still backbreaking. He did not care. The cabin was taking shape. That was all that mattered. Then in July, the heat arrived. The mountain sun was relentless. At 8,000 feet, there was less atmosphere to filter it. The ultraviolet was fierce. James burned, peeled, burned again. Even in the shade, the temperature climbed past 90. Inside the partially built cabin, it was worse. The logs absorbed heat all day and radiated it at night. He tried sleeping inside and gave up after 2 hours of suffocating stillness. Back under the wagon, he lay awake and thought about winter. If the cabin trapped heat like this in summer, It would trap cold the same way in winter. Log walls alone might not be enough. He remembered his grandfather then. The old man had come from Scotland, had built stone cottages in the Highlands where the wind never stopped and the cold could kill. James had been a boy when his grandfather told him about the double walls. The Highlanders had learned centuries ago that a single stone wall was not enough. The cold seeped through, so they built 2 walls with a gap between. The gap filled with nothing but air. Dead air, his grandfather called it. Air that could not move, could not carry heat or cold. It became a barrier, better than solid stone, better than packed clay, better than anything except maybe empty space itself. James had filed it away, as interesting but impractical. Now, lying under his wagon with sweat running down his sides, he thought about it differently. If dead air could stop cold, it could stop heat. The principle was the same. Temperature was just energy trying to move from one place to another. Dead air refused to let it pass. He sat up, stared at his cabin, made a decision. The next morning, he began building a second wall. The first person to see what James was doing was a fur trapper named Samuel Garrett, who came through in late August. Samuel took one look at the double walls and laughed. "You build in 2 cabins or one?" he asked. James kept working. "One," he said. Samuel shook his head. "That is twice the work for no reason," he said. "A good log wall is tight enough without all this." James said nothing. He had learned long ago that explaining rarely convinced anyone. Results convinced people. Words did not. Samuel stayed for coffee, then rode on. James went back to work. The outer wall was standard notch and stack. The inner wall was trickier. He needed a gap of at least 8 inches. 10 would be better. That meant the inner wall could not simply rest on the outer foundation. He built a separate interior frame, smaller logs, tighter joints, each wall independent of the other, connected only at the roof and floor. The space between them remained empty. No filler, no insulation, nothing. Just air trapped between 2 walls with nowhere to go. It took him until mid-September to finish. By then the aspen were turning gold and the nights were cold enough to freeze water in his bucket. He installed the door, chinked the gaps with moss and clay, built a stone fireplace in one corner, covered the roof with split shingles and tar paper. On September 23rd, he slept in his cabin for the first time. That was the morning he felt the difference. The temperature outside had dropped 20 degrees. Inside it was at least 40. He had built no fire. The heat was residual from the previous day, and his own body warmth. But it was not escaping. The dead air was holding it in. He built a small fire just to test it. Within an hour, the cabin was comfortable. He let the fire die to coals. The warmth stayed. 4 hours later, it was still warm enough to sit without a coat. Outside, the frost was thick on everything. He walked to the outer wall and felt it, cold as the air around it. He walked to the inner wall and felt it, warm, not hot. Just warm. The temperature difference between the 2 walls was at least 30 degrees. That meant the dead air was working. James spent the rest of the day experimenting. He opened the door to let cold air in, then closed it, and waited. The cabin warmed back up in less than 20 minutes with no fire. He built up the fire until the cabin was almost hot, then let it burn out. The heat lingered for hours. Longer than any single-walled cabin he had ever known. He understood then what he had built. Not just shelter, a buffer, a thermal barrier that worked both ways. In winter, it would keep warmth in. In summer, it would keep heat out. The mountain could throw whatever it wanted at those walls. The dead air would not care. As October arrived and the first real snows began to fall, James Monroe settled into his double-walled cabin and waited to see if his grandfather's wisdom would hold true against a Rocky Mountain winter. He did not have to wait long. The first storm hit in the 3rd week of October. It came without warning. One day the sky was clear and blue. The next morning, James woke to 3 feet of snow and winds that howled like animals. The temperature dropped to 0, then kept falling. He built up his fire and watched through the small window. as the world outside turned white. The snow did not stop for 2 days. When it finally cleared, the drifts were over 6 feet in places. The stream had frozen solid. The trees were bent under the weight of snow. James stepped outside, and the cold hit him so hard he gasped. His breath crystallized instantly. The air burned his lungs. He grabbed firewood from the stack against the cabin and hurried back inside. The door closed, and the cold stopped. Inside, the cabin was warm. The fire crackled in the stone hearth. He could move around in his shirt sleeves. He put his hand on the inner wall. Still warm. He walked to where he had marked a small gap in the chinking of the outer wall. He put his eye to it and looked into the space between the walls. Darkness. Nothing more. But he could feel the temperature difference even through the small crack. The outer wall was below 0. The inner wall was above 50. 8 inches of dead air was holding back a temperature difference of 50 degrees. James sat by the fire and did the mathematics in his head. If the principle held, he could maintain comfortable temperatures with a fraction of the wood a normal cabin required. That meant his woodpile would last longer. That meant fewer trips into the frozen forest to cut more. That meant more time to focus on other survival tasks: food, water, repairs. Over the next week, he confirmed his calculations. A single fire in the morning kept the cabin comfortable until evening. At night, he banked the coals and the temperature dropped slowly, but never to dangerous levels. Even when the fire went completely out, the cabin stayed above freezing. The dead air was not creating heat, it was simply refusing to let it escape. Or in the case of outside cold, refusing to let it in. By November, James had his routine established. Morning fire, cook breakfast, let it burn down to coals. Go outside for wood and water while bundled against the cold. Return inside, work on indoor tasks, stay warm. Evening fire, cook dinner, bank coals, sleep. His wood consumption was half what it should have been. When Samuel Garrett returned in December, the trapper could not believe it. James was comfortable, well-fed, rested. Samuel had expected to find him haggard and desperate. Instead, James looked better than he had in August. How, Samuel asked. James showed him the double walls, explained dead air, showed him the temperature difference with a simple test. He boiled water on the stove until the cabin was hot. Then he opened the door and tossed the boiling water outside. It flash froze in midair and fell as ice crystals. The outside air was 40 below 0. Inside, it was 70 degrees. Samuel stared at the walls with new respect. "You might have figured something out here," he said. James nodded. "My grandfather figured it out," he said. "I just remembered." Samuel left the next day, but word spread. By January, 2 more men had come to see the cabin. By February, James had visitors almost every week. Men who were struggling in their single-walled cabins. Men who were burning through their wood piles at alarming rates. Men who were starting to wonder if they would make it to spring. They all asked the same question. How much warmer was the double-walled cabin really? James would take them inside. Let them feel it. Then he would take them outside and let the cold prove his point. Some of them went home and started building second walls around their cabins. Some of them thought it was too much work. Those men did not last the winter, but James did. And when spring finally came in late April, his woodpile still had cords remaining. His food supplies were intact. He was healthy, strong, ready for another year. The mountain had tested him. The dead air had protected him. And now the real test was coming, because if the cabin could keep out winter cold, the question was whether it could also keep out summer heat. James was about to find out. The summer of 1888 arrived early and fierce. By mid-June, the days were pushing 95 degrees. At night, the temperature barely dropped. Men who had survived the winter started suffering in new ways. Their cabins became ovens. The logs that had provided insulation against cold now trapped heat like clay kilns. Sleep became impossible. Work became dangerous. Several men packed up and headed down to lower elevations. They would return in fall if they returned at all. James watched them go and wondered if his cabin would fare any better. The first hot day, he opened the door and windows at dawn to let in cool air. Then as the sun rose higher, he closed everything. The cabin stayed dim, cool, comfortable. He worked inside through the heat of the day, made repairs, organized supplies, read. Outside the world baked, inside the temperature climbed slowly, but it never became unbearable. By evening, when he opened the door again, the outside air was still over 80 degrees. Inside it was barely 70. The dead air was working in reverse. It was keeping the heat out just as efficiently as it had kept the cold out. James ran the same experiment he had done in winter. He put his hand on the outer wall, hot, almost too hot to touch. The logs had absorbed the sun all day. He walked to the inner wall, warm but not hot, comfortable to touch. The temperature difference was at least 20 degrees. That meant the dead air was creating a buffer zone. The heat could reach the outer wall, but it could not cross the gap. By the time it radiated inward, it had dissipated enough to be manageable. The inner wall stayed comfortable. The living space stayed livable. Over the next weeks, James refined his technique. He learned that ventilation mattered. On the hottest days, he would open a small window on the north side and the door on the south side. This created a gentle cross breeze that pulled hot air up and out. The dead air walls meant the heat coming in was minimal. The breeze removed what little did enter. The result was a cabin that stayed 20 to 30 degrees cooler than the outside air. When other men came by, sweating and exhausted, they stepped into James's cabin and stared. "How is it cool in here?" one asked. "Same way it stays warm in winter," James said. "Dead air." The man shook his head in wonder. "I burned all winter and roasted all summer," he said. "You stayed comfortable both times." James nodded. "The trick is not fighting the temperature," he said. "It is not letting the temperature in to begin with." That summer, James helped 3 other men retrofit their cabins with inner walls. It was hard work in the heat, but by August, all 3 reported the same results. Their cabins were livable, their sleep improved, their health improved, and they began to understand what James had known since that first cold morning. The secret was not in heating or cooling. The secret was in isolation, in creating a barrier that temperature could not cross. The dead air did not care if it was hot or cold outside. It simply refused to let the outside in, and that made all the difference. By the fall of 1888, James Monroe's cabin had become something of a legend in the San Juan high country. Trappers told stories about it in trading posts. Miners mentioned it in letters home. A few journalists from Denver even made the trek to see it and write about the mountain man who had beaten the elements with nothing but an extra wall and some trapped air. But James had no interest in fame. What he cared about was refinement. Now that he knew the principle worked, he wanted to perfect it. That winter, he made modifications. He noticed that the corners were weak points. Where the walls met, the dead air gap narrowed. Heat could leak through more easily. He added small interior corner posts wrapped in canvas. It helped. He noticed that the floor was another weak point. Cold air pooled there. He built a raised wooden platform 6 inches above the actual floor. The dead air beneath it created another barrier. The floor stayed warmer. He noticed that the ceiling was losing heat. Warm air rose and had nowhere to go but up into the rafters. He built a false ceiling, dropped it 18 inches below the actual roof. The dead air above it became another layer of insulation. Heat stayed in the living space instead of escaping upward. Each modification made the cabin more efficient. By the winter of 1889, he was burning even less wood than before. His morning fire lasted until bedtime. His evening fire kept the cabin warm until dawn. The temperature inside rarely dropped below 60, even on the coldest nights. Outside, it regularly hit 30 below. The dead air was not just working, it was exceeding every expectation. But James was not satisfied. He began experimenting with the width of the gap. Was 8 inches optimal? What about 6 inches, 10 inches, 12? He built test sections using scrap wood, created small boxes with different gap widths, filled them with hot water, and measured how long they stayed warm. The results were clear. Below 6 inches, the dead air became less effective. The walls were close enough that heat could radiate across. Above 12 inches, the air started to move. Convection currents formed. The air was no longer dead. It was circulating, and circulating air carried temperature. The sweet spot was between 8 and 10 inches, enough space to prevent radiation, not so much that air could move freely. Dead air, truly dead, that was the key. James documented everything in a small journal: gap widths, corner treatments, floor solutions, ceiling solutions. He drew diagrams, took measurements, recorded temperatures. He did not know if anyone would ever care, but he felt the information was worth preserving. By 1890, 7 cabins in the high country had been built or modified using his techniques. All 7 men reported the same results: warmer winters, cooler summers, less wood, more comfort. The double wall method was no longer a curiosity, it was proven, and yet most men still refused to believe it. The extra work seemed too much. The principles seemed too simple. How could empty space be better than solid logs? James stopped trying to explain. He simply lived the proof. Every winter, every summer, comfortable while others suffered, efficient while others wasted, alive while others gave up and left. The mountain was the ultimate judge, and the mountain had rendered its verdict. Dead air worked. In the spring of 1891, something unexpected happened. A group of engineers from the railroad came through the high country, surveying a possible route. One of them, a man named William Foster, had heard about James Monroe's cabin. Foster was educated, had studied thermodynamics in college, understood heat transfer theory. He asked to see the cabin. James showed him. Foster walked around both walls, examined the construction, asked detailed questions about gap width and air movement. Then he did something James had not expected. He thanked him. "You have proven something we have only theorized about," Foster said. "The concept of dead air insulation is sound, but until now I have never seen it properly executed in wood construction. Your grandfather was correct, and you have validated his wisdom with empirical evidence." James felt something shift inside him. For 4 years he had been dismissed by most men as eccentric. His cabin was viewed as an oddity, a strange overbuilding by a strange man. Now an educated engineer was telling him it was scientifically sound. Foster spent 3 days at the cabin. He took measurements, drew technical sketches, calculated thermal resistance values. He explained to James that what he had created was a primitive but highly effective thermal barrier. The dead air had an R value, Foster said, a resistance to heat flow. A single log wall might have an R value of 4 or 5, but the dead air gap added another R value of approximately 3 per inch. At 8 inches, that was an additional R value of 24. The total R value of James's wall system was nearly 30, 3 times better than a standard log cabin. James listened, but most of the technical terms meant little to him. What mattered was that the principles he had discovered through trial and error were being confirmed by science. Before Foster left, he made James a promise. "I am going to write a paper about this," he said. "I will submit it to the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. Your technique deserves to be documented and shared." James shrugged. "Do what you want," he said. But he felt something he had not felt in years: validation. It included detailed diagrams of James's cabin, temperature measurements from all 4 seasons, calculations of thermal efficiency and fuel savings. The paper concluded that double wall construction with optimal air gaps was one of the most efficient passive thermal designs possible for remote cold climate dwellings. The paper was read by architects, engineers, builders. Some dismissed it as impractical, too much labor for marginal gains, but others saw its potential. By 1895, variations of James's design were being built across the Rocky Mountains. Not just cabins now, warehouses, storage sheds, root cellars, any structure where temperature control mattered and fuel was scarce. The principle was the same. 2 walls, dead air between. Maximum thermal resistance with minimum materials. James himself never saw the paper. He lived in his cabin until 1903, when age and isolation finally forced him down to lower elevations. He spent his final years in Durango telling stories to anyone who would listen. Stories about the old country, about his grandfather, about dead air and double walls and the winter. He realized that sometimes the old wisdom was wiser than modern thinking could comprehend. He died in 1907 at the age of 63. His cabin stood empty for several years. Then a young trapper moved in and was amazed at how well it functioned. That trapper stayed 30 years. When he finally left, another man moved in. The cabin is still standing today, over 130 years after James Monroe built it. The logs have weathered, the chinking has been replaced, the roof has been re-shingled, but the double walls remain, and the dead air between them still does its work. In winter, it keeps the warmth in. In summer, it keeps the heat out, exactly as it was designed to do, exactly as James Monroe's grandfather promised it would. The legacy of James Monroe's cabin extends beyond one man's survival story. It represents something larger, a reminder that innovation often comes from remembering rather than inventing, that the solutions to complex problems sometimes lie in simple principles properly applied. That empty space can be more valuable than solid mass when the goal is isolation rather than connection. The thermodynamics are straightforward. Heat moves in three ways: conduction, convection, and radiation. A solid wall allows all three. Heat conducts through the material. Air inside the wall convects and carries heat. Radiant energy passes through. But dead air disrupts all three. It cannot conduct well because air is a poor conductor. It cannot convect because it is trapped and motionless. It can absorb and slow radiation. The result is a barrier that temperature cannot easily cross. This principle has been rediscovered many times throughout history. Ancient Roman insulae used air gaps in walls. Medieval castles employed hollow walls in cold regions. Traditional Japanese homes used similar techniques, but in each case the knowledge was often lost or forgotten. James Monroe did not invent the principle. He remembered it, tested it, refined it, proved it. And in doing so, he gave practical validation to an idea that had been dismissed as old-fashioned or unnecessary. Today, modern building science has embraced the concept completely. Every well-insulated building uses some form of dead air space. Double-pane windows trap air between layers of glass. Wall cavities are filled with materials that create millions of tiny dead air pockets. Insulated panels, foam boards, fiberglass bats. All of them work on the same principle James Monroe used: trap air, stop it from moving, let it create a thermal barrier. The only difference is scale and materials. The principle remains unchanged. Dead air is one of nature's best insulators, and the man who proved it was a solitary mountain dweller who trusted his grandfather's wisdom more than conventional thinking. James Monroe's story might have ended there. A footnote in engineering history, a curiosity in the archives of thermal design. But in the decades after his death, something interesting happened. The technique kept spreading, not through academic channels, not through official building codes or architectural journals, but through word of mouth. Trapper to miner, miner to rancher, rancher to homesteader. Men who lived on the edges of civilization where survival trumped theory. They heard about the double-wall cabin, they tried it, it worked, they told others. By the 1920s, double-wall construction was common enough in remote mountain areas that it was simply called the mountain method. No one remembered James Monroe, but his idea lived on. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the technique found new relevance. Families were building rough cabins on marginal land. Money was scarce, fuel was expensive. Anything that reduced heating costs was worth doing. Double walls meant more initial labor, but they meant lasting savings. For families trying to survive on nothing, those savings could mean the difference between staying and giving up. Government agencies began including double wall designs in homesteading guides, not with credit to Monroe. The origin had been lost, but the technique was there, drawn in simple diagrams with measurements and notes. Air gap 8 to 10 inches. No filler, let the dead air do the work. During World War II, military engineers used similar principles for cold weather structures in Alaska and northern Europe. They called it airspace insulation. The science had advanced, the terminology had changed, but the core idea remained. Trap air between barriers, stop heat transfer, survive extreme temperatures. By the 1950s, the advent of modern insulation materials began to eclipse the need for double wall construction. Fiberglass bats were cheap and effective. Foam boards were easy to install. The labor-intensive process of building 2 complete walls became unnecessary. But in remote areas where materials had to be hauled in and cost was prohibitive, the mountain method persisted, because it used only what was locally available. Logs, air, labor. Nothing else required. Today, the technique is experiencing a quiet renaissance. Not because modern materials have failed, but because people are rediscovering the value of passive design, of working with natural principles instead of fighting them, of building in ways that require no energy input to function. A double-wall cabin with dead air insulation requires no electricity, no mechanical systems, no maintenance beyond basic upkeep. It simply works year after year, decade after decade. For off-grid builders, this has enormous appeal. For sustainable architects, it represents a model worth studying. For historians of technology, it is a reminder that not all progress is forward. Sometimes progress is circular. We advance, we forget, we rediscover, and we realize that people 100 years ago sometimes understood things we had to relearn. The cabin itself still stands in the San Juan Mountains. It is not easy to reach. The trail is overgrown, the last mile requires hiking, but people still make the journey. Architects come to photograph it, engineers come to measure it, historians come to document it, and off-grid enthusiasts come to see proof that simple solutions can outlast complex ones. The current owner, a man named Robert Chen, has maintained the cabin meticulously. He spends summers there. He has installed modern amenities, solar panels, a rainwater system, a composting toilet. But he has not touched the walls. The double walls are sacred, he says. They are the reason the cabin still functions after 130 years. Everything else can be updated, but the walls stay. Chen has recorded temperature data for 5 years. In winter, with outside temperatures at 10 below zero, the cabin maintains 55 degrees with a single small fire per day. In summer, with outside temperatures at 95 degrees, the cabin stays below 70 with no cooling system. The dead air is still working, still creating a buffer between inside and outside, still proving that James Monroe's grandfather was right. Chen has also tested the walls with modern thermal imaging. The images are striking. The outer wall shows bright red and orange, absorbing heat from the sun, radiating heat from inside. The gap between the walls shows as a dark band. No heat signature, no energy transfer, just dead air doing its work. The inner wall shows as cool blue, protected, insulated, stable. The thermal imaging confirms what James Monroe knew. From touch, the 2 walls are living in different thermal realities, and the 8 inches of trapped air between them is the reason why. There is a broader lesson in James Monroe's story, one that extends beyond building techniques or thermal efficiency. It is about trust. Trust in knowledge that has been passed down. Trust in principles that seem too simple to be true. Trust in the idea that sometimes the answer to a modern problem is an ancient solution. James Monroe could have built a standard cabin. It would have been half the work. He could have followed conventional wisdom, burned more wood, suffered through summers, survived. But he chose to trust his grandfather's words, chose to believe that dead air could do what solid logs could not, chose to invest double the labor for a benefit that was not yet proven. That choice saved his life. It also contributed to a body of knowledge that has helped countless others. And it stands as a reminder that wisdom is often preserved in stories, in the memories of old men telling young boys about how things were done in the old country. Those stories can seem quaint, irrelevant to modern life. But sometimes they contain truths that technology has not improved upon, only forgotten. The trick is listening. The trick is being willing to try what sounds too simple, The trick is understanding that innovation is not always about creating something new. Sometimes it is about remembering something old and applying it in a new context. James Monroe did not invent dead air insulation. He remembered it. And because he remembered it, and because he had the courage to build based on memory rather than convention, he survived. His cabin survived, and the principle survived. That is the real legacy. Not the structure itself, but the idea that solutions often exist already, waiting in the memories of those who came before, waiting to be trusted, waiting to be proven true once more. The San Juan high country is silent in winter. The snow falls and covers everything. The wind blows and nothing moves. The cold descends and settles in deep. James Monroe's cabin sits on its south-facing slope, exactly where he placed it in 1887. The pines around it have grown tall. Some have fallen and been replaced by new growth. The stream still runs, freezing in winter, thawing in spring. The clearing still catches the morning sun. Inside, if you were to visit, you would find a space that feels alive despite its age. The floor is solid, the walls are tight, the fireplace draws well, the windows let in light, and if you pressed your hand against the inner wall on a cold morning, you would feel what James Monroe felt that first September day in 1887. Warmth. Not from a fire, not from the sun, but from the simple principle of dead air refusing to let the cold inside. You would understand then, in that moment of touch, why James built the way he did, why he trusted his grandfather, why he invested twice the labor for a benefit that seemed invisible. Because the benefit was not invisible, it was just subtle. It was the difference between 50 degrees and 20 degrees, between comfort and misery, between staying and leaving, between survival and surrender. And all of it came down to 8 inches of trapped air that neither heat nor cold could cross. That was the secret. Not complex, not expensive, not modern, just air, dead air, and 2 walls that kept it trapped exactly where it needed to be. That was how one mountain man's cabin trick tamed summer heat and defied winter cold. Not by fighting temperature, but by refusing to let it matter. The outside world could be brutal, the inside world stayed steady, and the space between made all the difference.